Okay, so last week I told you to turn the person next to you that you came with that causes you stress. And what did I say do? I said, tell them, stop stressing me out, right? Now I want you to turn to them and say, okay, you did a little better, but I need better than you did this week. You get a little better, want more out of them. So how are we going to do that? We're going to talk about I think the most important thing in reducing our stress, and if you remember last week, I gave you a definition of stress. Stress is when our capacity gets overwhelmed. It's when whatever our capacity to deal with whatever it is that's coming towards us gets overwhelmed, and we feel stressed. The body goes on alert, and chemistry changes and all of that. And so I talked about a lot of that last week, and I put that formula up there, that the way our capacity and where it comes from. Now, do you hear that? Okay, now what's happening? His or her capacity is being overwhelmed. And that little baby's body's going, wee, wee, wee. Right? That's us. We get overwhelmed and our body. And I said it's going to be your physical state and the state of your mind and the mental part of this. But if you remember, I said the third piece comes from the power of the other. And it's the relational space in which we are connected. And what I want to do today is I'm going to give you a map of how to know at any moment in your life where you are in that relational space, because it has more to do with stress than any other factor. So, when people go to preacher school, which I never went to, obviously, but I know what they tell them. They tell the preachers that when you preach, you got to tell them what you're going to tell them, and then you got to tell them, and then you got to tell them what you told them. So I'm going to tell you what I'm going to tell you. I'm going to give you a map, and I want you to be able to find where you are at any given moment. What you're going to see about this map is it's not static, it's dynamic. That we're always moving from this different places in this relational universe where we live. And the map has 4 corners in it. And I call this the 4 corners of the universe. Because guess what? You are somewhere every moment. You ever gone have lunch with a friend, you sit down and they say, so where are you? You go, in the restaurant, idiot. But what are they really asking you? Where are you inside? And what they're asking you about, ultimately, is your internal state, where you truly are, the real you, where that real you is. And here's what I want you to learn first about the real you. You are designed, you are created as a connecting being. You're designed that way by God. If you're at the summit, I talked about the cell phone, right? When you land on an airplane, what's the first thing you do when you hit the tarmac? If you're male, you actually do it before you hit the tarmac. You turn your cell phone on, right? And what happens when you turn it on? It goes up in the left-hand corner. It says searching for connection. Because there's a chip in that phone that is designed to, as soon as it gets turned on, it starts searching for the connection. You and I, and please hear this, because you may know this and you may not, or you may know it and sometimes try to deny it, or we may know it and sometimes lose it, but you and I are designed with a chip inside that from the moment that doctor slaps you on the butt and says, welcome to the world, you're searching for connection. That little light comes on in your eyes. You had one, and then they clipped it, and now you don't have one, right? And you're searching for connection. You're like that little baby. We come in, I tell you this, the first thing a baby does when they're born, they don't turn to mom and say, gosh, Mom, was that hard on you? I'm sorry. Let me clean up around here. You go get a massage. The baby searches for connection. They go, wah, 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 until they find it. And gradually, as they find it, what happens? They find it, and it helps for a minute. And then they got to find it again because they're internalizing it, and it helps for a minute. And then gradually, when they've internalized this connection and the software has been downloaded and they got some love on the inside of them, they can go longer and longer and withstand more stress. In fact, I remember when our first daughter, Olivia, got to be, in the beginning, she wakes up, and then she wakes up 3 hours later, and then she does that, and she does it. But as Tori would go and meet that need for connection, gradually what was beginning to happen was you'd hear something different, and she's like, getting into several months, 6 months or so, and then you'd hear this, ba, 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 doo, 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 doo. And she's waking up and she's singing for a minute, and then she's, wah, wah, wah. She runs out. And see, we're designed like that. So there's only 4 possibilities of where you can be. And I want you to write this down on 3x5 or something and ask the question each and every day, where am I? Because you're going to be in one of these 4 places. The first one is the corner of no connection. That's where we have the chip, and we may deny it, but the chip is on, and it's searching for a connection. And we're designed for this. And sometimes we can have a lot of people around us, but we're not connecting. You can be on a team at work and you feel like you're in it by yourself or nobody's really listening. Or you can be in a marriage and still be alone. How many times have we heard that? You can grow up in a family and there's bodies around you, but internally that chip can't connect with anybody, either because we can't do it because we've been broken, or because there's no cell tower out there. Or you're in a place where these need states aren't getting met, and you're existing, really, your cell phone is on, but it's still searching, and we start to run down, and we start to have symptoms. And what happens is, if this is the state that we live in more than, just a little minute or two, remember I said your capacity for stress? Your capacity is diminished. One of my favorite news studies, I think you can find this on the NPR website. They took people, and I love these psychologists who design these studies, especially the ones where they shock people. It's so cool the way they do this. I don't know what happened to them in childhood, but if you've ever met an experimental psychologist, something's wrong with those people. But so here's what they did. They put the person in a room, all isolated, hook them up to electrodes, and they hook their brain up to measure stress centers in the brain. And then they tell them, sometime in the next 10 seconds, you're going to get shocked. And their stress level begins to go up because they're waiting on it. And then they shock them, and they shocked them good. They talk about it. They told me it was going to be a mild shock. It wasn't mild. And they keep doing this, going to be a mild shock. Sort of like when the doctor says, now you're going to feel a little stick here. Yeah, right, little for you. So they shocked them, and they measured the stress level. Then they moved to phase 2 of the experiment, and they bring a person in, sit them down in the chair next to them, and say, okay, this time they're going to hold your hand to help you through this. But in the next 10 seconds, and they repeat it, and they measure the stress level. Guess what happens to the stress level when this person that they don't know is there holding their hand? Nothing. Stays just as high. So then they take them out and they move to phase 3, and what the person didn't know is the experimenters had invited a close friend of theirs to come in, and the close friend sits down, and they see them, they take their hand, they say, okay, in the next 10 seconds you're going to be shocked. They measure the stress level, guess what? There's no stress. It goes down to non-shock conditions. But they had a connection. They weren't alone anymore, and it was a connection that was a familiar connection. And that's the only way. I could pick up that baby and they go, who are you? And if we're not building the familiarity of these connections, we're in corner 1. All right, so, that doesn't feel good, so we look for something. So then we go to corner 2, and that's what I call the bad connection. And a bad connection is when we get connected, but it's a bad connection. I don't mean they're static. It doesn't have to be abuse or static on the line or whatever. But the nature of a bad connection is, we're connected, but in that relationship, I go away feeling like I'm bad in some way. I'm not good enough. I can't please them. Can't meet their expectations. You ever felt that? There's just something about the nature of the connection. I told you last week that the two big, kind of contexts that stress lives in are the context of when we feel controlled by somebody, or we're not in control of ourselves, somebody else is, or when we feel like we have to be perfect. Remember? Just seeing if you're awake. Where we have to look good, where we have to, and we can't make a mistake. Okay? Now, if you are in a relational context, and that's your primary feeling of who you're connected to, they matter more, and what they think matters more than anything, listen to me, I promise you this is true. Physiologically, it is impossible for your body to feel in a non-stressed state when it is feeling like I'm being controlled by the outside, or when it feels like I'm being judged. You won't feel an absence of stress. The stress goes up, and it affects our bodies. A woman came to see me one time with a problem that she presented of sexual dysfunction. And I said, well, what's the problem in your sex life? And she said, well, I just don't feel anything. My body doesn't respond. And she had been married about a year or so, and she said, I love my husband, and we have a great relationship, but my body just doesn't respond. I don't feel anything, and it's causing us a lot of stress, and he's really accepting and good with it, but it just doesn't, I don't know what's wrong with me. So I started to ask her some questions and kind of learn about her a little bit, and after a little bit of talking, I said, let me ask you a question. Do you happen to have a couple of women, maybe older women in your life that you look up to, that what they think really matters to you, and it really affects you, and you try to live up to what they want you to be? And she goes, how'd you know that? I said, I'm a shrink. That's what we do. She said, yeah, I do. And I said, who are they? And she said, well, there's two of them. And they're in my church. And she said, they're my they're my mentors, and they're these godly women. And she put them up on this pedestal. And she just was always trying to live up to their expectations and their standards. But I could tell in a way that wasn't really okay. I was getting this about her wiring. So I said, okay, here's what I want you to do. Next week, I want you, in this coming week, I want you to go set up 2 lunches, one with each of them, and I want you to go have lunch. And in that conversation with your mentors and these godly women, I want you to disagree with one thing that they say during the lunch. And she goes, why? I said, because I just need you to go disagree. She said, well, why would I do that? I said, because you do. She said, what? I said, you do. She goes, well, I don't want to just, I said, you already disagree with something. You're just not saying it. I know you. I mean, I just met you, but I know you. You're not saying it. So if they order chocolate pie, I want you to say, you know what, I don't really like chocolate. I think I'm going to get strawberry. If they like this political candidate, and you say, well, I don't really like that or agree with that position. I've got a different one. I just want you to disagree with something. And you can see her starting to get stressed, right? And so I said, go do it. Come back and see me. She comes back the next week. I said, come on in. And she's sort of like, you could tell she's a little, I said, what's wrong? She said, well, I had the lunches, and now, it's all I can think about. I said, what? She said, well, the first one, I went, she's mentoring. We're doing life planning, and we want to have kids one day. And she said, what are you going to do about their schooling when you have kids? She said, I'm so excited. The neighborhood we live in, there's this great elementary school. We can walk to it. And the lady goes, what? I thought you were a Christian, and you're going to send your kids to public schools? You're going to hand them over to Satan? Give them over to secular humanism? You can't do that. You've got to homeschool your kids. You've got to nurture them in the Lord. And she's like, oh, gosh, maybe she's right. I hadn't thought about that. And yeah, maybe, well, I kind of never. And so she comes out of there, and she's kind of rattled, right? because she doesn't really feel free in that relationship to have her own opinions. So then she goes to the second lunch, and her second spiritual mentor says, so what's God been telling you lately? She said, well, I think he's really leading me to get prepared for being a mom and leading me to really study homeschooling so I can homeschool my kids. And her second spiritual mentor goes, what? I thought you were a Christian. God tells us to be in the world and be a salt and light and reaching people and loving people in the name of Jesus, and you're going to put them in some little holy huddle and shield them? And now she's going, because she's not free. She's connected in significant ways, but the connections are almost like downloading stress. She's not free in those relationships. This happens a lot of different ways. But it screws up our heads. And I want to talk for just a second about this. I wrote a book called Boundaries with John Townsend. And basically, if you want to sum up the book, it basically said, here's kind of the bottom line of the book. There's no Bible verse that says, blessed are the doormats, for they shall inherit the hills. It's not in there. Did you know that Jesus said, let your yes be yes and your no be no? But that's not what we do, because we don't feel free. And sometimes our yes is not a yes on the inside. There are some of you who are under great stress because somebody's controlling your life. It may be an in-law. It may be a parent from your family of origin. It may be even some of you spouses need to go have talks about how you feel controlled. Some of it might even be in your own head. But what a boundary is, see, God has given you an immune system, and what an immune system does is when a germ comes in, it says no. I'm not going to ingest that and let that be part of me. And the word no, I wish we still had that baby. Because we could bring that baby up here. It is wired into you by the living God, every creature. You do something a baby likes, and their head starts to say yes. You do something that doesn't feel good, and they'll go like this. No, don't want that. It's wired into us, and later we're supposed to put language to that. A lot of your stress, a lot of my stress comes from our not saying no. This is why this is such a big issue. And it's very hard to not say no in these relationships because people aren't happy about it. I remember one time a lady said to me, well, what do you do with controlling people? I said, you convert them. She said, well, they're not interested in God. I said, I didn't say convert them to God, although that I'd love you to do that. But you convert a controlling person into being a frustrated person. She goes, what? I said, they're only controlling because you're saying yes. All you got to do is say, no, well, thank you for that suggestion, but I really don't want to do that. I'm going to say no, and they will get very frustrated. But they're no longer controlling, are they? Because you're free. And see, I want you to take a little audit, and where do I feel under judgment? Where do I feel like I'm not free to say no, and go address that? And you can just learn some little things. I hear this all the time, and I say, why are you trying to address that with your parents or with whoever? Why are you trying to address it in the moment? Because when you're trying to address it in the moment, you say, I want you to drop by, I want you to come over, and you say, well, no, I can't. Then it turns into a big deal inside of you and blah, 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 blah. Take them to lunch and sit down and say, you know what? You guys really matter to us, and we want to make sure we see you. We want to make sure that maybe you could drop by like we'd like to see you every week. Now, they've been dropping by every day, right? But we're trying to organize our lives, and so if we could have a dinner together, if we could have this together, and you structure this, and you say, we can't do more than that, and you start to set some structure around it, that helps. One of the things that drives me crazy, one of the biggest stressors, my wife will tell you, is people that just can't draw a breath when they're talking to you. It's not a conversation. You know, it's like, let me go get some coffee and I'll be back. You hadn't missed anything. So I have my new little one. I say, you know what? My brain is big and my head is small, and I just don't have any room for your words. So you got to find your little ways, but you know, it really is to say, you know what? I love that invitation, but I need some time for myself, or I need to do this. Just learn to say no. But I guarantee you're not going to learn to say no without help. See, nobody ever said no in a corner two relationship by staying in corner two, because you got the bad connection. If we don't go down, what I'm going to tell you is corner four is a real connection. If we can't go to where somebody would support our no and empower us to go out there and say no in that relationship, we never build it. I remember a woman who finally said no to the bad boyfriend, and she did it through a group that empowered her, and she had always gotten sucked back in. She finally started going to this group, and she said she had broken up with him, and then he called again, started to, you know, kind of woo her over the phone, said, why don't you come over tonight? And she said, I started to go, and she was telling her group, and she said, and then I heard your voice say to me, what are you doing, you idiot? And I heard your voice say, don't you know God has something better for you than that? And I got all these voices in my head, and I told him I got to go, and I hung up the phone. See, you'll never get out of a bad connection in a bad connection. I don't mean you necessarily leave the relationship, but you leave the way it's connected. And you do that by getting what you need in a supportive one, which we'll talk about. Well, so far life's pretty bad, right? Up here in these... You know, I'm glad I came to church today. Get to find out about being isolated and being controlled. A lot of you are going... In fact, you know, some people actually, they feel cut off from God. They don't have a connection with God, so they go to church, but they go to a number 2 church. I don't know if that was a slip or not. It's a church that makes me feel bad, and I get dumped on. I had a neighbor say to us one Sunday morning, she said, where y'all going? I said, I'm going to church. You want to go? She goes, I'm not going to church. I said, why not? She said, I can't handle the guilt. Guilt at church? Are you kidding me? I don't know what church you've been going to, but my Bible said the one that founded this church, his name was Jesus, and what he said was, I did not come to the world to make people feel bad. I didn't come here to judge anybody. I didn't come here to condemn anybody. And too many people think that's what God is about, and he's not. He's not about controlling you, and he's not about judging you. And he doesn't want your life to be usurped by other gods who do that. But sometimes we end up in church feeling it's like that way. We go, I'm not going back there. I'm going to go isolate. I got a friend said, I invited him to church. He said, no, I'm playing golf. And I said, well, come to church with me. He said, I'd rather be, you know, I think God would rather me be on the golf course thinking about him than being in church thinking about golf. See, we're always connected somewhere, right? So life pretty much is bad until we go, I got to feel good. I'm not going to go do that. I'm going to go feel good. And we go down to corner number 3, and that's a good connection. But it's a pseudo-good connection, meaning it's not really real. It doesn't answer the cry of the chip inside. It doesn't build capacity, but it does make us feel good for a minute. We medicate ourselves. We try to connect with something that's going to make me feel good. I heard a Christian woman speaker, famous one, stand up and say to an audience, she said she had to confess that she was having an affair with 2 men, Ben and Jerry. See, sometimes it's food. I'm getting better, though, actually. Can anybody think I'm getting better? No, not so much. Some of you. So I'm back, you know, I'd gotten fat again. And by the way, I heard the greatest line about getting fat. This guy says, somebody was talking about their weight problem, and he goes, don't tell me you're fat because obesity runs in your family. He said, nobody in your family runs. So I come here, I've been getting good, I've lost some weight, and I come and I said, Bill, I'm losing weight. He goes, where? That might have been a corner 2 moment. But we try to medicate ourselves. Let me tell you about a guy that called me a couple of years ago. He's a renowned heart surgeon, East Coast, hospitals named after him, renowned. He called me and said, I almost have wrecked my life. I said, how? He didn't use this terminology, but he had been living in corner 3. That's how he dealt with his stress. In corner 3 were a lot of nurses, and he had illicit relationships with several of them and some in his office. And so now his professional world was crumbling and his marriage was crumbling. He said, but my wife said that she'll work it through if I will get a plan, and she'll stay with me if I can really change. And he said, my business partner said the same thing. So I got a plan. I want to fly out and spend some time with you. And he came out and he said, I want to show you my plan. And he gives me the plan. And it's basically all the stuff he's going to do. He's going to be more committed to meeting her needs. And he's going to pay attention to her instead of coming home. And he said he would come home every night and have 4 or 5 martinis and just kind of pass out on the couch because he's so exhausted. You have to get up at 5 in the morning, go do 12 surgeries. And he just he said, and I'm going to be a better husband. I'm reading books on being a better husband and doing all this stuff. And he had this whole list of great things. And I'm listening to it, and I'm getting more and more depressed. I didn't exactly know what to say, and so I told him this. He said, what do you think? And I said, well, you flew all the way out here, and you didn't fly all the way out here for me to lie to you. I'm going to tell you the truth. You're headed for a second heart attack. He says, what do you mean? I said, it's going to happen again. I guarantee you, if that's your plan, I guarantee you it's going to happen again. He said, why? These are good things. I said, I know they're good things. I said, but let me tell you something about the human heart. He looks at me, really? I said, yeah, the heart has 2 pipes coming in and 2 pipes going out. That whole plan you just gave me, it's all output. There's nothing coming in. You got clogged arteries on the coming in side. I said, you don't have any more capacity to say no to that stress and that need and that temptation at the end of that plan than you have had. And I am really worried about your wife right now, if that's your plan. He said, what would a different plan look like? So we designed one. A year later, he calls me. And he says, can I come out again? And this time I want to bring my wife. I said, yeah. And they came. And I'm not trying to say it had been easy and that everything was perfect. It wasn't. But they sat and they told me about they're having the relationship that they always wanted to have. And I said, tell me what you did. And you know what he did? He got plugged in corner 4 with some real connections. And what I mean by real, see, there's people around in all these other corners, but these were real. He went to an SA group, Sexaholics Anonymous, what is it? Sex Anonymous, whatever it is, like AA. 2 or 3 times a week. He had a sponsor that he met with, had breakfast with, or lunch 2 or 3 times a week. He started going to a counselor, and he went every week, and he had an accountability partner, and then they went to couples counseling. And he said, I've gotten in this program, I've been working, he said, it's about 12 hours a week. This is a heart surgeon that doesn't have, he said, I don't have time for this, but I found out if I don't have time for this, I don't have anything.